And welcome back. We have a 2001 Nissan Maxima. Now this thing has seen some better days, but it needs front brakes, so we're gonna go ahead and get that done today. This car has a center brace which also serves as a jacking point. So we're gonna go ahead and use our floor jack to lift up the front end of the vehicle from here, and once we get the front tires off of the ground, we're gonna go ahead and use jack stands. You always want to use jack stands. Do not rely on this floor jack because they're not safe at all. You never know when they're going to give out. As far as the jack stands, you just want to make sure you find a place that's very secure and sturdy. Once you have your car up and secure on jack stands, you want to go ahead and chalk off the rear wheels. And you could use these wheel chocks, or you could use a piece of wood or a brick. It doesn't matter. You just want to prevent the car from rolling. Okay, so obviously this car has other problems, and it turned out that the CV shaft, the nut that goes on it to hold the wheel bearing in, was only finger tight. That's right, I was able to take off that center nut with my fingers alone. So clearly someone did not torque it down to spec. And in fact, it was like this exactly on the other side of the vehicle. So someone did a really bad job doing this, and because of that, the wheel bearings are no longer any good and we have to replace them. So hopefully I get this job on replacing the wheel bearings, and maybe I'll make a video of that one. Now that we have our wheel removed, we're going to get in the car, turn it on, and we're going to turn the steering wheel all the way to the right, and that's because we're working on the passenger side of the vehicle. If I were working on the driver's side, I would want to turn the wheel all the way to the left. And the reason for that is just to give you better access to the rear of the caliper so you could access all of the bolts easier. The caliper has two main fasteners holding it down to the caliper bracket, but you only have to remove the lower fastener, and it's going to allow you to rotate the caliper upward just like I did here. And as you can see, you have great access to your brake pads. So if that's what you're going for, you just want to change your brake pads, you just have to do a bit more cleaning, but this is pretty much as far as you have to go. Now if you're gonna change your rotor as well, just follow along with the video because we're gonna remove the caliper bracket. As far as the top fastener, you can leave that one in place, and you can see it slides right off of the caliper bracket via the slide pin. So once we get that out, we're gonna go ahead and hang up this caliper off of the spring of the strut right up here. And I'm using this little hook, and it's great for this. That's what it's designed for, but you could also use something as simple as string or a piece of wire to hold up your caliper. Basically, you don't want it hanging off of the brake hose. It could damage it. Now that we got the caliper out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and remove these two fasteners that hold the caliper bracket on. Now they're on here pretty tight, so I have to upgrade to a 1/2 inch ratchet, and mine is pretty long. You might want to use a breaker bar for this. And while I'm doing this, I'll explain a little bit more about that whole wheel bearing situation. Like I said, I was able to take the nut off with my fingers, so it was nowhere near tight. We're not going to be replacing that wheel bearing today, so all I could do for now was put a little bit of thread locker on those threads where the nut goes, and I tightened it down to spec, and I got it nice and tight, and it's definitely nowhere near as loose as it was before. So it's much safer this way, but the bearing is destroyed. It's completely dried out. It makes a lot of noise when you're driving it. With those two fasteners removed, you seen I was able to remove the caliper bracket, and now I took the rotor off. You seen how easily the rotor comes off once that bracket is out of the picture. And let's take this opportunity to go ahead and clean everything. If you have any rust sitting on your hub right here, it could cause all kinds of problems with unevenness of the rotor. So make sure you clean this off as good as you can. And I'm just going to go ahead and apply a little bit of anti-seize, and it's just basically to prevent the rotor from sticking to the hub in the future. So the next time we have to come in here, it just makes the job a little bit easier. With the wheel hub all cleaned up and ready to go, we can go ahead and install our new rotor. But first we have to clean it off. They come with oil on them, and that's basically just to prevent them from rusting while they sit on the shelf at the store. So I'm using brake parts cleaner to clean it off, but you could just as easily use soap and water. It works just as well. I've used it plenty of times. And you want to make sure you clean both sides. Anywhere where the brake pads are going to contact the rotor, you want to make sure you get it very clean. Now after putting the rotor on, you're going to see it doesn't exactly sit flat. So what I like to do is grab one of the wheel lug nuts and just thread it on to the lower stud. It's going to hold the rotor on flat, and that's just basically going to help you when it comes time to reinstall your caliper bracket. Now here comes the fun part. This is the step that's overlooked by most people, but cleaning all of the rust, dirt, and grime off of the caliper bracket has a much larger effect than you would think. As you can see, I'm using a file here, and I'm not trying to take any material off of the caliper bracket itself. I'm just trying to get rid of all the rust that's sitting on here and anything else. Once you get that all cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and apply some grease here. And the grease is just to prevent any moisture from getting in between the brake hardware kit, which is also the brake shims, and the caliper bracket itself, because that's where rust tends to build up. Now as you can see, I'm cleaning the hardware kit here, and ideally you would want to replace these, but if you buy an economy set of brake pads, they're usually not going to come with a new hardware kit, so you have no choice but to reuse your old ones. The least you could do is go ahead and clean them up like I'm doing here, but ideally you would want to replace those shims. Like always, I'm applying a little bit of blue thread locker onto all of the fasteners that have to do with the brake system. It's just a little bit of added security, and it just gives me peace of mind. And of course, every nut and bolt that comes off of a car does have a torque spec from factory, so I highly recommend you follow these torque specs. It's the right and the safe thing to do. Okay, so this is a bit difficult to show you if it were on the car, so I took it off just so I could demonstrate how it's supposed to work. Basically, you want to hook over the brake pad onto the shim, and it's going to go right on this small clip right here, and the clip is just going to serve as some sort of a spring. As you can see, as I push down on the brake pad, it pushes it back out. Now we can install the shims that we cleaned up. If you have a brand new set, obviously you want to use the brand new shims. And after we get the shims in place, we are free to go ahead and install our brake pads. You may have noticed that when I took everything apart initially, the shim that had that spring action was actually on the top side, and right here in this clip I have it on the bottom side. So yes, I do have it backwards, and I did have to go back in there and fix that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now if you did a good job at cleaning the caliper bracket by removing all of the rust and that stuff, when it comes down to put the brake pads on, they should slide on there pretty easily. You should not have to use any type of force or tools. There's going to be no prying, no hammering, or anything like that to get the brake pads on. You've seen how easily I was able to get them on just with my hands alone, and that's the way it should be. Now we can focus all of our attention on the caliper itself, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove it off of this hook and set it right here on the rotor. Now I'm going to grab one of the old brake pads that I just took off of this car, and I'm going to use that to compress the piston on the caliper. Since we have brand new brake pads and a new rotor, the caliper will never fit over it, so you have to compress the piston. I'm using this tool that's designed for this. The nice thing about it is that it's very affordable, and you could get it at your local auto parts stores. And here you can see how well that tool worked at compressing the piston on the caliper. So all of that is good to go. But before we go any further, it's always a good idea to check the slide pins. The slide pins are very important as well. So even if you check them and they already have grease on them, it's not a bad idea to clean off the old grease and apply a fresh coat. Just like the other fasteners, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of blue thread locker on here and torque it down to spec. And now we're going to turn our steering wheel to the forward position one more time. Now we can put our wheel back on it. I'm using my impact gun to lightly put on the lug nuts, and this is just so I could get the car back on the ground where I can use my actual torque wrench to torque everything down to spec. And here's a quick tip: once you're done with one side of the vehicle, before you move on to the other side, just get in your car and pump your brake pedal a few times. You're basically pushing that brake fluid back into that caliper where you compress the piston, and it just might prevent any brake fluid from overflowing out of the reservoir. And that's pretty much it on how to get your brakes done on your Nissan Maxima. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're considering subscribing, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And like always, thanks for watching.